Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Bible study. It's great to be able to connect with you today. I'm having to pre-record this week because I have the message tomorrow, so I'm going to miss being able to chat with you all in the chat on Facebook like we normally do. But Lord willing, and as we say back in the country, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, then we'll be able to get back to our regular schedule next week, and we'll be able to chat some together on Facebook in the chat as we go through our lesson. In the meantime, I did want to go ahead and pre-record this because, as you all know, with my physical condition, it's difficult to do both the lesson and preaching at the same time. Some folks seem to think I get a little excited when I preach sometimes, so I don't know where they'd get that opinion. But we'll go ahead and move into our Bible study today. We're going to be in Luke chapter 6. We'll be focusing on verses 27 through 38. And the title of our study today is Compassionate Living. Compassionate Living. Again, that's Luke 6, 27 through 38. We can find an excuse for ignoring or discrediting people if we really want to, especially in today's political environment. Can I get a witness to that? We may classify them as being undereducated, too young, too old, or numerous other designations as a way to justify our mistreatment or our mishandling of them. In an effort to absolve ourselves of guilt, we may place a title on someone else that puts them in a category that appears to me a less than me grouping. But Jesus operated very differently. He loved all people, seeing them as worthy of his attention and of his help. He confronted his critics, showing them how to be compassionate in the process. How many times did they talk about Jesus because he would associate with what they called publicans and sinners, and the way they would classify other people into categories that could be considered less than themselves? Jesus expects us, as his followers, to show compassion and mercy to others. So as we think about this today, let's look a little bit at the context here in Luke 6, verses 17 through 49, the context of this passage that we're looking at today. This context begins in what we often call the Sermon on the Plain. So many times we talk about the Sermon on the Mount, but this is an area that we call the Sermon on the Plain. And it's often referred to it that way because it took place in an area that Luke described as a level place. Luke 6, verse 17. When we think about a level place in terms of geography, we think about a long, open field area, a plain where something like this would take place. People to hear this message came as far south as Judea and Jerusalem, and as far north as Tyre and Sidon. They brought people with illnesses and demonic affliction to be healed and delivered by Jesus. The Sermon on the Plain has several points in common with the Sermon on the Mount, and the Sermon on the Mount is given to us in Matthew chapters 5 through 7. It includes a variation on the Beatitudes. It focuses on people who suffer for righteousness' sake. And on the other hand, Jesus pronounced, "Woe upon those people who enjoyed wealth and comfort with no thought of God or of other people." The central idea of the message, the Sermon on the Plain, is to love other people, even enemies or people who make life difficult for you. Believers express love by doing good for all people, just like the Heavenly Father does. And so the highest form of love that we can show to someone else involves mercy and forgiveness, just like the form of love that God shows to us. Consequently, we should not judge people harshly, but remember that we too fall under judgment. Before we correct someone else, we should examine ourselves. Jesus' parable of the trees and their fruit in this message portray the way people's hearts are revealed by the produce of their lives. tell what's on the inside of someone by the fruit that they produce on the outside. Jesus concludes this with a charge to apply his words to our lives. He compares people to house builders, one building a strong foundation that enables the structure to endure the onslaught of a flood. The other failed foundation, whereupon the house was destroyed. Even so, if we do not build our lives upon his word, we are in danger of disaster. So let's explore the text this morning as we get into Luke chapter 6, starting with verse 27. Luke 6, we'll look at verses 27 and 28 first. The first thing we see in this Sermon on the Plain is love all. Listen to verse 27. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who... Jesus emphasized the difference between non-believers and his followers. The contrasting conjunction that he gives here is but. He starts it out, but to you who are listening. That's the contrast that he's given here as he pulls the previous part of the message together with what he's saying here. So he pulls these two things together and he says, we're going to differentiate between the evil people that are mentioned in verses 24 and all the way through 26. So we're going to differentiate and distinguish between the evil people of verses 24, 25, 26 and believers in verses 27 through 31. If we looked back at Luke 6 and verse 17, we see a description of the audience for this sermon. It included Jesus' disciples, not just the 12 apostles, but also the larger group, Jesus. Other people from across a larger region also came to hear Jesus. But verse 20 here notes that Jesus looked specifically at his disciples in this section of his message. The passage could be understood as Jesus speaking to his followers in verses 20 through 23, to the masses in verses 24 to 26, and to everyone else in verses 27 through 49. How often it is that Jesus gives individual and specific attention to certain people as certain messages apply to different people. These persons are summarized in the phrase, when he uses the phrase, you who are listening. This is a similar kind of a phrase that he uses many times in other teachings that he gives when he uses the phrase, he who has an ear, let him hear. That phrase, whoever has an ear to hear, let them hear, is the same thing as saying, you who are listening, listen to what I'm about to say. In other words, it's a point of emphasis that's coming to those who are listening. Christ followers imitate his example of going beyond the normal to express the nature of God's love in human interactions. Jesus did not tell us merely to love our enemies, because he demonstrated it in many situations. We can love our enemies because God loved us while we were still his enemies. Listen to Romans 5, verses 8 through 10. Listen to this. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since we have now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if, while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? Isn't that a wonderful promise? And listen to Colossians 1:21. The Bible says, once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. Put all this together with the example that Jesus gave us in his own life, and we see that love is not merely an emotion. True love expresses itself in action. In this case, by doing good to those who hate you. Unless we put deeds to our declarations, our words are empty. Jesus often showed compassion toward people How many times have we found ourselves wanting what Jesus has to offer and neglecting wanting more of Him in our life? The verb translated hate contains the sense of ongoing action. This term involves an idea of extreme dislike and even loathing. We are to do good, not just to someone who commits a single act of hostility toward us, but also to people who continually hate us. It may be one thing to do good to people who hate us, but it's another matter to bless those who curse you. Just like he's saying in this section of the message here, bless those who curse you. To bless requires that we not only do good, but that we desire God's blessing for these people. To curse means much more than just using foul language. It denotes a desire for continuing harm, a desire to see someone else come to harm or to difficulty in their own lives. On the other hand, the word bless is a compound term. It means to speak well of someone. It involves asking God to show His favor upon that person. So asking God to bless someone who at the same time is asking for a curse upon us requires a love that only God can provide. An even deeper level of love requires that we pray for those who mistreat us. These people not only hate and curse us, but they are actively doing harm to us. But instead of retaliating, as we normally would want to do in the flesh, we should pray for them. The love of Jesus leads us to follow the way He responded to people who harmed Him. Listen to 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 23. The Bible says, when they hurled their insults at Him, talking about Jesus, He did not retaliate. When He suffered, He made no threats. Instead, He entrusted Himself to Him who judges justly. And listen to what He said on the cross. Be reminded of that in Luke 23:34. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. We should also pray for those, not only who curse us, not only who mistreat us, but also those who actively come against us for harm, that God would show His mercy on them, because it is truly a fearful thing to fall into the hands of God, who is exacting His wrath and judgment. Now let's move on to verses 29 through 30 here in Luke 6, verses 29 through 30. In verse 29, if someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you. If anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Verse 29 should not be mistaken as saying someone suffering abuse should simply endure it, because Scripture instructs people to rebuke wrongdoers, and in certain cases to bring the person before the church for correction. Matthew 18 talks about that. Luke 17 talks about that. Some commentators here in Luke chapter 6 point back to verse 22 and suggest that the command from Jesus here reflects suffering for Christ's sake. In that case, if someone slaps you on one cheek because you're suffering for Christ, because you're a believer, then by offering the other, it also demonstrates your willingness to suffer for Jesus' sake. A similar example involves someone who takes your coat. The coat was the outer garment commonly worn by Jewish men. The phrase appears to indicate someone taking a coat by theft or violence. The example that he gives here on the Sermon on the Mount, also it's a corollary example here, involves using a lawsuit to take someone's garment. Matthew 5 and verse 40. A person who loves the other person more than his possessions will not withhold the shirt as well. And the shirt in Jesus' time was a tunic that was worn beneath a cloak. Isn't that an interesting thing he's talking about here? What does it mean to give to everyone who asks you and to not withhold from someone in such a way? Does that mean that we should indiscriminately give a handout to every person who approaches? Well, while we should be more generous than it is in our natural tendency to be generous, that application is not what Jesus meant here. In this case, it is a much more personal situation. Scripture recommends generosity, especially to the poor. Listen to Deuteronomy 15, verses 10 and 11. Give generously to them, and do so without a grudging heart. Then, because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. Jesus' admonition goes beyond being benevolent to and giving toward the poor. It exemplifies love in a very tangible way. Keeping in mind the immediate context, we don't question what might be the impure motives of the person making the request, but yet we respond with love. The interpretation finds support in the final command that he gives here of not asking anyone who takes what belongs to you return to them. We might think of a neighbor who's borrowed something and does not return it. But the text goes beyond merely borrowing some item. The item was actually taken away. Again, if we love people more than we love our possessions, we can gift the item to the individual in Christ's name so that we might bear witness to his love. He's talking about someone who takes something from us that they genuinely, truly, really need. An outer covering, cloak, food, those kinds of things. Being able to show compassion and caring more about them than we do that specific item brings honor to Christ and makes him famous in the life of that receiver. Listen to verse 31. Do to others as you would have them do to you. We've known this since childhood as the golden rule. So in summarizing these commands, Jesus urges his followers to consider what you would have others do to you. Whatever treatment you desire, he says, do to others. This familiar saying is often said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the way most of us remember this golden rule. Instead of making a lengthy list of specific actions, we simply treat other people the way we wish to be treated. And this rule in Matthew 7 and verse 12 shows a culmination, a bringing together of all the law and of all the prophets. Believers are to treat all people with dignity and respect. And while the context involves applied Christian ethics in all interpersonal relationships, we can certainly make specific application, especially on the Sanctity of Life Sunday, which is this Sunday, to the unborn. Of all human beings, these innocent deserve our love, and they deserve our care. Do to others as you would have them do to you, and this especially applies to the unborn. Well, let's move on now to Luke chapter 6, verses 32 through 36. He's also talking about having compassionate living with a pure heart. Let's read verse 32. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Jesus pointed out 3 examples in which Christian love should exceed the natural human response that we have within ourselves. Many people love those who love them. Certainly there's nothing wrong with loving people who love us, but Jesus' point is that even sinners love people who love them. In other words, nothing about that kind of behavior brings glory to God. It's merely a part of being human. Therefore, that's why Jesus asked, what credit is that to you if you do things that everyone does? Jesus was not trying to motivate his disciples to seek credit. The term translated credit is the same word that's normally rendered as grace. This use of the word also conveys the idea of showing kindness. Loving the people who love us does not reveal the grace of God or any real kindness on a human level. It is merely the expected reaction. Jesus' second question follows a similar argument. It looks back at the second half of verse 27. He says, if we do good to people who are good to us, we are not doing anything that's extraordinary. The old saying, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. Anybody ever heard that before? That's what comes to mind here. Many people are willing to help those who help them. But nothing about that behavior glorifies God, for even sinners, even the lost, do that. It brings no credit to the doer, and it brings no credit to God. A third example that Jesus gives here refers back to the issue of lending or giving to others, as seen in verses 29 and 30. If we lend to those from whom we expect repayment in return, he's talking about here, we merely mirror decent society. Many people will let a neighbor borrow something if they believe that the neighbor will return what is borrowed in good condition. Again, he says, what credit is that to you? The point is, neither God nor the human actor receives any praise in this kind of situation. He says, for even sinners lend to sinners. Even the lost, he's saying, lend to the lost, expecting to be repaid in full. Then in verse 35, Jesus again uses that contrasting conjunction we talked about earlier, the word but, to emphasize the difference between these examples and what he wants believers to do. Followers of Jesus should behave differently than worldly people who love, help, and lend to other people who love, help, and lend to them. Instead of only loving people who love us, we are to love our enemies. Christ's law of love reaches past the expected to the undeserving. Although he did not repeat the word enemies in the admonition of doing good to them, it's understood from verse 27 that doing good applies to people who hate us. Similarly, our willingness to lend should not be limited to people who can pay us back. Rather, while expecting returned at the same time. In other words, he's saying, don't love the things that you have in this world more than you love other people. If your things are keeping you from ministering to and to give to other people, then you have your priorities misplaced. For the things of this world and everything in it shall one day pass away. 1 Peter tells us that even the elements themselves will one day be burned up. He's saying, don't love your things more than you love people. And then he goes on to say that those who embrace this ethic of love and apply it to all people will experience two benefits. First, your reward will be great. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus spoke of giving benevolently in private so that your reward would be great in heaven. He talks about that in Matthew 6, verses 3 and 4. This reward does not involve wealth, fame, promotion, or power in this world. Instead, it relates to our blessings from the Heavenly Father, who is glorified by our following of Christ's example. The second benefit is being identified as children of the Most High. The Father is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Aren't you glad of that? He's kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. The term kind stands in complete contrast to this word ungrateful. God's grace is not dependent on the gratitude of the receiver of that grace. God's love is not reliant on the loveliness of the person who is the receiver of that love. God bestows mercy to all who repent and receive Him, whether they are good or evil. If we would be known then as children of the Most High, we should demonstrate love toward all people equally. In doing so, we show an unbelieving world the kind of love that is available through our Lord Jesus. Then, summarizing this section, Jesus commanded His followers to be merciful. We may have it in our power to exact retribution, revenge upon people who harm us. But instead, Jesus teaches us we're to be forgiving. What is our motivation? Because our Father is merciful. That's our motivation. If we are God's children, we will demonstrate mercy toward others as He has demonstrated mercy toward us. So believers are to love all people. We cannot harbor any ulterior motives as we interact with other people. If there's any shadow of self-interest in our behavior, people will spot it in a moment. If we are to glorify God, we must allow His pure love to flow to us and through us to each person we encounter. Then we move on to Luke chapter 6, verses 37 and 38. Look at, and he's talking about have compassionate living with mercy. With mercy. Listen to verse 37. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Jesus offered two principles here, one stated in positive format in this grouping, and another two principles stated in a positive format. So we had a negative format and a positive format. But all four of these two illustrate the nature of how we're to treat other people. There's a reciprocation here that happens. In the first pair of admonition, two similar terms are used. The phrase "do not judge" comes from a root word meaning to consider someone guilty. It involves a form of legal terminology. And the second phrase, "do not condemn," has a similar source. Jesus used it to denounce people who condemn the guiltless. People accuse people who should not be accused. The warning not to judge does not mean to avoid discernment, but rather not to set ourselves up as judge and jury, because only God is the true judge. Be careful what you say. Be careful how you say it. Be careful of what you post, and be careful how you post it. We should approach others with mercy, no matter if their opinion is the exact opposite of ours, or if their political affiliation is the exact opposite of ours, or if their favorite candidate is the exact opposite from ours. We should show mercy. We should demonstrate mercy in all that we say and all that we do, and even especially in our interactions on social media. In the corresponding point in His Sermon on the Mount, Jesus also talks about this very thing with a further explanation. He says in Matthew 7, verse 2, listen to this, "For you will be judged by the same standard with which you judge others, and you will be measured by the same measure you use." Not judging others does not mean we will avoid being judged by God, but rather God will exercise mercy toward us as we show mercy toward others. Jesus went further in showing us the model prayer when He taught us, "Forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." This "as we forgive" is a phrase that means in the same manner or in the same fashion as we forgive someone else. So what He's teaching us to pray there is, God, forgive other people in the same fashion as I forgive them. Apply that to me in my life. Apply forgiveness to my life based upon how I forgive other people. The third admonition carries the principle even further. We should forgive as God has forgiven us. Our willingness to extend mercy and forgiveness to others is linked directly to God's mercy and forgiveness. Then listen to verse 38 as we wrap up this morning. Give, and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So instead of criticizing, judging, and condemning people, the children of a merciful Heavenly Father focus on how they can benefit others. Just as God gave His great love and His greatest gift of love to us, John 3:16 tells us that. Even so, we should give, knowing that the same will be given to you. So we do not give with the motivation of seeking a return on our investment, but to give in the right way, we give as a cheerful giver, with all glory going to God. He is generous to the person who, with loving hearts, are generous toward others. But God is not miserly with His gifts. Jesus describes God's measure as good. And the image is like a basket of grain that is pressed down, shaken together, running over. It portrays the abundance of God's liberal blessings that He pours out upon us. To have God's gifts poured into your lap, as He talks about here, indicates the personal nature of God's return to the open-hearted person. As with judgment and condemnation, even so mercy and gifts come back to the giver in the same way as they are expressed to others. The measure or the standard that we use here in dealing with other people will be the same measure, the same standard that is measured to us. So we as believers are to exhibit God's character in this world. We should go beyond the normal in our behavior toward other people, whether people are good and kind to us or not. We are to show godly love in trading criticism for forgiveness and condemnation for mercy. So as we think about that this week, we should have compassionate living and demonstrate that in all the things that we say, we do. And we should extend this compassionate living not only to all those that we meet at home, online, at work, any place that you may meet them, but we also should strive to stand up for and see that this compassionate living is extended as we celebrate Sanctity of Life Sunday to the unborn, so that they too will have the opportunity to experience God's grace and mercy in the life that they live here on this earth and express it to others in the way that God would intend. Compassionate living, we should speak on behalf of others, and we should pray for the blessing of other people, the biggest blessing of all, knowing Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. God bless you. May He bless this study to your heart as He has to mine, and may we seek to apply it in our lives each day so that we might serve Him better. God bless you all. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.